Welcome back. Welcome back to the live coverage from the AWS Summit in Berlin on twitch.tv/AWS if you're watching us on the stream. And if you're here in the Summit venue with us this afternoon, thanks for joining us. This is a panel discussion that we're going to be hosting now. And we're going to be chatting with several members of the AWS team from the local unit here in Germany, talk a little bit about experiences at Amazon Web Services. And we've done this panel quite a few times at other AWS summits around Europe and actually further afield. I saw it in Singapore myself, a version of it in April this year. And the reason for that is we've been asked consistently over the course of the last few years by customers to share a little bit more detail about how Amazon and AWS operates. So what kind of techniques we use to innovate at scale, what kind of techniques and mechanisms we use to run the business. And we want to try and fulfill that request by running these discussions in various summit locations around the world. So we're back here again in Berlin today to try and do that with some colleagues from Germany. Very happy to be asked to chair the panel and chat with a few colleagues, some of whom I've met before, some of whom I haven't, which is awesome. Just to quickly introduce myself, my name's Ian Massingham. I work on developer technology evangelism at AWS. And as you can tell, I am not from Germany, but everyone to my left and your right is. So they'll be answering the questions and I'll be asking them. And this is our panel today, as you can see on the screen behind me. And obviously, like any good panel, the first thing we have to do is ask the panelists to introduce themselves. So maybe starting with you, Jonathan, over on the far end, you can talk a little bit about who you are and what your role is at AWS and Amazon.
Yeah, sure. So I've been with Amazon about 6.5 years, ever since the startup actually that Thomas and I had was acquired. I'm responsible for several of our management services. We help customers operate and manage their applications on AWS. And I'm very excited to be here.
Carolin?
My name is Carolin. I've been working with AWS for 1 year and 9 months as a territory business manager, which means I'm responsible for accompanying new clients to the AWS cloud, which is both interesting from a technical perspective, but as well from a culture change perspective.
Great. Thomas?
As Jonathan mentioned, so hi, my name is Thomas. I joined the company as well like 6.5 years ago, and my responsibility is to lead a bunch of teams that develop internal tooling for the services teams to do their job.
Great. And Lars?
Yeah, I'm Lars. Hi, I'm with AWS a little bit more than 3 years. I'm head of product management of the commerce platform team. And commerce platform in a nutshell builds the system that computes and sends all the bills to all AWS customers. So that is every month millions of bills to our customers.
Great, excellent. So as I said in the opening remarks, we're here really to learn a little bit more about how Amazon and AWS operates. And one of the themes that's been running through the Summit program this year is about builders, about how we want to enable people to build businesses and build products using AWS. But we also say within Amazon that we hire builders. So, Thomas, can you talk a little bit about what that means? Obviously, you're managing a team. What do we mean by builders? And what kind of things do we expect from new hires that are joining the AWS team?
Sure. I think what the folks on my team and across the company share is the willingness to solve a problem on behalf of our customers, right? And the customers can be very diverse. It can be kind of you folks, for our case, like kind of our customers are internal teams. And the idea to, as a small team, kind of have this agenda kind of to solve is for your customers and do what needs to be done to fulfill that goal. Pick the right tools, pick the right architecture and solutions to get this done is a very hands-on like kind of attitude where people just like, okay, let's solve this together.
Okay, great. Carolin, you mentioned in your intro that you're working in the sales team here in AWS in Germany, and we might think about innovation in terms of the role that it has for individuals that are building products, but can you talk a little bit more about innovation in your role? Do you think there's anything about AWS that's allowed you to innovate, particularly as somebody that's responsible for sales and account management?
Absolutely. I think one of the key differentiating factors at AWS is that from the first day that you start at AWS, you're given trust and you're given ownership from both the management and your peers. Everyone expects you that you will do your job well, they believe in you. They will believe that you do your job well, and not just your job, but they believe that you will speak up whenever you see the opportunity for improvement, and that you will roll up your sleeves and work together with your peers to solve any challenge, be it within your job or outside your job. And that's really sort of the mindset that we have, and that enables you to do a lot of different projects outside your direct scope of work. So be it supporting and hiring or mentoring new employees, helping with onboarding. These are all sort of things you can innovate in any given job, in sales as well as in more innovative roles as well.
Great. What about you, Jonathan? What's your take on innovation in your role at Amazon?
As was said, I think for us, what is very important is that we give teams autonomy and the ownership to drive a problem to conclusion. I think this very much aligns with the startup background that I mentioned Thomas and I have, where you need to wear many different hats in order to get something done, right? So we care less about who's actually responsible for what is it officially my title to own something or not. Like ultimately we want to solve the customer problem, and if that means that my team gets to solve it, or if I need to divert resources so that we can work together with another team to do it, we will do that. So I think you have this strong culture of let's do what is right for the customer, and worry less about who's officially responsible, whose title says what.
Great. Lars, you've changed your role in the 3 years that you've been at AWS, right? And I think you've had a bit of change in other areas of your life as well. So can you talk a little bit about how your responsibilities have changed and what that life change has also meant for your role at Amazon?
Okay, sure. I think with the life change, you mean that I got 3 kids in the last 3 years? Yes?
Yeah.
Okay, good. So I joined originally AWS like 3 years ago in the international product management team, and took care of, in that role, of the German market and of our data center cluster that we have in Germany, also our region. In that role, I wrote a lot of papers about Germany and let Seattle know what the German Mittelstand or mid-market is, and so forth. And then a little bit more than a year ago, HR approached me and asked if I would be interested to help building a new team here in Berlin. The team was Commerce Platform, and it's a team that is headquartered in Seattle, but has now satellite teams in Vancouver and Berlin. So we started building that last year, and have now a couple of teams here on the ground to work on services along the Commerce Platform pipeline. And so I think the working culture at Amazon made it possible that I also have more or less a little bit flexible hours. Also can take care of the role as a father. I took also 2 times parental leave in my 3 years. So I also traveled the world besides rolling out cool projects, and it's been good.
Excellent. So if you're joining us on the stream, just to quickly recap where we are and what we're doing here. You're live with us from the AWS Summit here in Berlin in Germany. And this is a discussion panel with some members of the team from AWS Germany, where we're talking about culture and life, working at Amazon here in Berlin, and also in the other sites that we have here in Germany. So we're at an AWS Summit here today, as I just mentioned. I've actually been to a lot of these. Just this year I've been to a lot of them. And it always amazes me what a massive logistical exercise it is to run an event like this. There must be 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 people here today. It's a huge event with a ton of customers and a ton of AWS team members and partners here. And following these events, we always do these lessons learned wrap-ups, which I'm sure a lot of you will see, where we focus on things that we could improve. Is often the first thing that you'll see in our internal event reports that we produce, which I find really, really interesting. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about learning at Amazon on an individual basis for these next set of questions. So, Carolin, maybe we can start with you. What do you think is the main thing that you've had an opportunity to learn about since you joined AWS?
I think at AWS, really, there hasn't been a single day where I didn't learn something new. So that being said, it's extremely difficult to single out one particular thing where I've learned. But one thing that I'm maybe particularly proud of is passing my Associate Solution Architect exam after just 4 months of joining AWS. It might seem like not a big milestone to many. It's a simple piece of paper. But for me, it was really going outside of my comfort zone, because I'm not per se a technical person. I have a business background. And so the company put the trust in me to say, hey, no, you can do this, you can pass a technical certification. And for me, it was really that learning of going outside of my comfort zone and achieving this certificate that has really enabled me to hold conversations on a technical level, to speak to my clients on an eye level, to establish myself as a trusted advisor to many of my clients, but also to believe in myself that I can do a lot more than I previously expected of myself.
I think this idea that the business is technology and the technology is business is something that we kind of all buy into here, but it's still quite interesting to go out to customers and find that there's a much harder line between business and technology out in customers that we might have in our own org. I think it's kind of contrasts how Amazon is a little bit different to some other companies that are out there. So time management. It's a busy place, right? We've all got a ton of things on our plate and a lot to do, sometimes a lot in backlog to do, as well as what's right in front of us. So, Jonathan, can you talk a little bit about time management, how you manage time between the team that you lead and also the projects that you're working on as a contributor?
Yeah, so as you said, right, like there's always a lot to do and the work could never stop, and you need to prioritize and decide where to spend your time. I think what we as a company found works best for us, and I personally apply with my teams, is to create small, decentralized teams that own end-to-end their problem space, and you give them a clear goal, a clear agenda, and that's kind of what I spend most of my time on, setting direction, giving them guidance, and then you give them the freedom and autonomy to execute on it.
Okay, that sounds to me like sometimes people might end up working on things that are outside their core remit, you know, kind of creating their own role or switching roles as a result of things that they identify. Does that ever happen, Thomas? Have you ever been in a situation like that where you've moved roles or created a new opportunity for yourself, maybe?
Yeah, I did. Like, kind of in the end, after joining AWS, I got like kind of my work contract said like, this is your job title, and I'm fine with that. I didn't know what that means, but like kind of I was explicitly asked to do what I was doing beforehand anyhow, just get this thing started and do it. And by now I think I have the third job title, and also it still doesn't really matter. Like kind of what matters to me is like that identifying these opportunities, and how I ended up with this job title basically was understanding that this massive growth that we have in AWS led to kind of potential efficiency gains across the different teams. So I kind of went out of a role where I was supporting an individual team into a role that is more like a platform. So we built these tools for others. And we pitched that idea and we got the buy-in, and by now we are having a team of teams actually doing this.
Can you just say a little bit more about where your effort, where your engineering and product work actually becomes visible? Because I'm sure that it is visible to customers, right? It's just not.
It is visible. Like kind of, if you have seen, or kind of, you probably have noticed or you probably know the AWS Management Console. And the Management Console is built by the individual teams. As Jonathan mentioned, like kind of each team has the responsibility end to end, and that includes the customer experience. So my team is building processes and tools for designers and front-end developers inside the company to be more efficient, releasing these like kind of new features. So last year we launched 1,430 things. Yep. Somebody needs to do that, right? And we help them do that.
So it's removing duplication that might exist across teams as well. That's something that I think is not so well understood outside Amazon, that we're constantly looking for opportunities to introduce efficiency by creating internal services. Got something to add on that, Jonathan?
Yes, I wanted to hook into that question, like were examples where people created new roles for themselves, and how do kind of innovation happen. And I think actually if you look at most of our AWS services, they were started by people having an idea, listening to customer feedback, and then writing what we call a PR and FAQ and kind of pitching this and saying, we need to build this. And then convincing our leadership to fund it. And this is literally how most of our services start, right? Like we identify a customer problem, we convince enough people that it's worth solving, and then we put funding into it. So Thomas' project is a great example that happened here. We have others that happen in Berlin, but I think most of our services are actually a perfect example for that, where we don't have that very strict, we need to do this and that. Like we listen to customers and we innovate on that.
Yeah, there's a big drive from team members to take ownership of problems that they can see in front of them as well and get them solved, right? I wanted to talk to you, Lars, about projects that you've worked on. So we heard a little bit there about individuals in the teams here that have had to, or chosen to go outside of their own role and work on other things that they've regarded as valuable. What do you work on that might be outside what people might consider as your, in quotes, job description? And what's the best or most impactful project you feel that you've worked on here? Okay,
so first my title is also Senior Manager Product Management, but at the end I'm also building and operating an entire engineering group, so that's also outside, I would say, outside the job description. Then I'm also engaged in a couple company-wide initiatives where I help develop others. So, for example, we write a lot of narratives or docs at Amazon. So, and it's very important to write good docs. So I help people to get better at writing docs, for example. So that's also something that I do in as a side project, so on. And when you ask me cool projects, I mean, do a couple of cool things, but I can't talk about them really. I did one that I can talk about, I'm pretty proud of, was also announced here last year, which was the launch of the third AZ in Frankfurt. Yep. And that was something I was working on, and I was pretty happy that it was announced here. So.
Yeah, if you're watching on stream, welcome. You're joining us at the AWS Summit here in Berlin with a group of AWS team members chatting about their experiences of working at AWS. And you might also have just heard the abbreviation AZ, which you may not know about. So an AZ is one of our data center clusters. We're operating in one specific region. So we have 3 of these in Frankfurt, which means we have 3 data center clusters that customers can use in order to deploy their services in a way which meets their availability requirements and cost requirements as well.
Thanks for extending.
That's what an AZ is, yeah. Sometimes we get pulled up on jargon. Yep. So I want to turn back to you, Jonathan. You're the longest tenured person on this panel, right? You've been at AWS longer than anybody, I think. And that's actually the reason that Jonathan and Thomas have these fetching gold outlines on their badges behind me as well. The outline color represents tenure. So blue is 1 to 5, 0 to 5. Yellow is 5 to 10. And then we get into less commonly seen colors like red and purple and white if you've got really long tenure. So Jonathan, can you talk a little bit about how Amazon's grown a lot over that period, right? Just since I've been here, it's grown from 100,000 to over 500,000 employees. It was probably even smaller when you joined. So can you talk a little bit about how we maintain and protect the culture of Amazon as we scale in that way? I'm really interested to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, so I think you said it right. Culture is the key word here. I think that's what allows us to scale and grow so quickly. And at the same time, we need to protect that culture when we grow so fast. We have our leadership principles that we take very seriously. Like if you Google Amazon leadership principles, you will find them posted and can read them. And they kind of act as our tenants and they guide us in our decision making. And it was very important for us when we kind of joined and started to build the development center here to make sure that we instill these values quickly to the team and we use them. And that's like true for all of those small remote offices or even in Seattle where we use the leadership principles as a way to inform and influence our decision making and to scale so that they are very important to us and we constantly adapt them.
I really want to dig into leadership principles in a little bit more detail because I think it's something that's completely unique to Amazon and AWS in the way in which we use them. But before we get into examples of how you all use leadership principles or LPs in your everyday work, Thomas, maybe you can tell me a little bit more about them as you've also got some long tenure here. What are leadership principles and how do we use them in your view?
Yeah, so as Jonathan mentioned, they're kind of guiding decisions, and you will find them on Amazon.jobs, for example. They're all listed. They're not something secret, right? They're out there. They describe what they mean. And if you have these values to live and work by, and they're used, right? Many companies have them. Very few use them. And that is the differentiator that I have seen as well in this company is they're used. If I have new hires in my team, they quickly pick up on the language and the idea, and they use this to argue, why something is right, or why we should do something in a certain way. And what most people probably don't immediately see, what might not be explained as well, I don't know, but the idea is that these leadership principles help steering by also being in conflict to each other. So we have some bias for action, do something, don't overthink it.
Oh, but what about dive deep?
Yes, or insisting on the highest standards. So you have ideas that capture a quality we are going after, but they're also in conflict. So you can have a meaningful discussion and people understand what you're after, what is your mental model, why do you bring this up now? And that helps making meetings, if we have them, highly efficient.
I'd like to ask everybody to give an example of a time when they've used the leadership principle to make a decision in their role. But I want to start with you for that question, Carolin, if I can. I'll return to the other 3 panel members in a second, so you've got a minute to think about it. But can you give me an example of a time that you've used an LP in action to help you make a decision to get to the right outcome for a customer or for the business?
Sure. Really, at Amazon, a leadership principle guide absolutely everything that we do, be it hiring, as was mentioned, or promotional discussions, but also really everyday decisions. And one of the leadership principles that resonates most with me is bias for action. Bias for action means that we believe some decisions are reversible. Not every problem requires extensive study. And sometimes you should just take calculated risks. And the way we see that every day in our lives is that Amazon and Amazon Web Services at any point of time run many, many pilots. We just try out new things. We don't always know the outcome. We don't always succeed in our pilots, but we just try it out. And failure is not a terrible outcome. In fact, you'll be wrong many times, and many pilots, after half a year, we don't see the results that we want, and we stop the funding and we move in a different direction. And that is fine, because management and your peers believe that maybe we have to do some things wrong a couple times to really hit the nail on the head and to do something needle-moving and great. And that's really the sort of mindset and the environment that really motivates me to want to work there and to really try out new things every day.
Great. Lars, can you give an example of using a leadership principle or LP in your role?
Sure. I mean, since I'm leading engineering teams, so what I often apply is, what I'm faced with is often a challenge between diving deep and think big. So, the engineers have to dive really deep into topics, and solve really tiny problems, but that at the end have to solve a really big problem. So you have to make sure that they're not get lost in the details, but at the same time solve a problem that solves a higher good. At the end, a customer issue. So it brings again us to also another leadership which is customer obsession. So you can also always ask the question: so is this what we're doing? Is this really solving a big problem, or is it just something that's not really matter, and is it really creating value for somebody at the end of the day? So I think that's always a nice thing, that you can use different views on a situation and make it a better thing.
Great. And Jonathan, you got an example of using an LP in your daily work?
Yeah, so my favorite leadership principle, and I think that is also very critical, especially as you become senior at Amazon for success, is being right a lot. And there is a lot of kind of wisdom in these few words, right? First it says, be right a lot. It doesn't say be right always, which implies that we're okay with you making mistakes regularly. Or as was said, right? We want you to take risks. We encourage risk-taking. Obviously, we would prefer people to have a positive track record, right, and not make mistakes all the time. But if you can't make mistakes, if you can't experiment, you will not innovate, right? You will always pick the safe solution, and that doesn't allow you to innovate. And then the other part that is in there is, okay, how do you actually be right a lot, right? And if you read the description of being right a lot, it basically says that we encourage people to seek diverse perspectives. We value people that actively disconfirm their belief, right? So strong opinions loosely held. And that's something that I find super valuable in discussions, and if I interact with people, the people I admire the most are people that are able to, if they're presented with new facts, basically reconsider their position and so forth. So we're looking always for what is the best outcome.
Yeah, you can be right by changing your mind, and that's also fine, right? So you can be right by reversing your position in the face of evidence. I actually really like that. It's one of my favorite leadership principles, and one that I've kind of learned the nuance of over my time here, I think. That's a really good example. Okay, innovation, surprisingly enough, is not a leadership principle, right? It's not defined in any one of those LPs, but there are quite a few leadership principles that touch on innovation. I wanted to talk more about our innovation process, because we also have a mechanism for that. Can you talk about that for a bit, Thomas, the working backwards process, and how we use that to drive innovation at Amazon?
So in the end, it's it's derived by one of our leadership principles, the customer obsession for me, right? So the customer obsession, doing what is right for the customers. And as mentioned, my current teams, they came into existence by following the mechanism you're referring to, and the mechanism is called working backwards, or working backwards from the customer. And it starts with the idea that we figure out first what do we want to solve, right? And we do this in a peculiar way. We write a press release of the desired end state. This is what we want to do. The cool thing is everybody in the company does that. Everybody knows what that means, how that process or that idea works, right? And the artifacts around it. So for example, like kind of last year, there was something in our office that was like kind of, this could be done better. And I just wrote up one page, and I sent that to like the VP for facilities, and like they're cool. That's an interesting idea, and they moved on with it. Like kind of this is a shared like kind of culture in the end. It's a culture thing. Like kind of we work backwards from the customer's need. As mentioned in the beginning, customers can be very different, but we have this structured process to deal with ideas.
Yeah, Carolin, do you have a working backwards example you can talk about?
Last year, I attended an event which we called Berlin Calling, where it was an offsite for 2 days, where we created a safe environment, really shut ourselves away from the daily business and thought about the big problems of the world and how technology, AWS and Amazon with its large ecosystem can really help solve the big problems of the world. We already see technology enabling a lot of positive change, like cancer screening is getting improved with image recognition, or monitoring solutions that get clean water to some of the poorest regions of the world. So we're really thinking along those lines. How do we solve the big problems of the world with our technology and with our ecosystem? And not only that, we really thought about what can we do within just 6 months to help solve the problem. So we were thinking about a minimal value proposition that we can create a working prototype from really quickly within 6 months. And after 2 days, using the working backward process and writing the press release and an FAQ document, we pitched our ideas in groups to the senior management, very much like a startup pitch. And the best projects were being voted on and taken forward by the management. There was funding created, and we've already seen some tremendous results from this thinking session. So it's not really that we produce paper that goes into a drawer, but there's actually attention to it, there's funding behind it, and there's senior management attention. And that was really a great experience on how also Amazon and AWS and our technology help solve bigger problems and bigger issues in the world.
Great. If you're watching us on the stream, just to recap, we're live from the AWS Summit here in Berlin in Germany, and this is a discussion panel with several members of the AWS Germany team where we're talking about what it's like to work at AWS and Amazon. It's got a couple of questions left, and first question I've got is about rolling out these leadership principles, these values, these like belief system that we have to customers. Is that something that we've experimented with? Maybe you can talk about it, Carolin, in your role as an account manager. Have we done anything to try to help customers use these kinds of approaches for their own innovation? Is that something we do?
Yes, earlier I talked about bias for action. So that was the leadership principle where we take calculated risk and we really dare to try out new things. And that's one of the leadership principles that we take a lot to our customers, and we encourage our customers to do proof of concepts, to run pilots, and to really try out new things. And AWS Cloud technology is one of the great enablers of being able to show bias for action and running these POCs and pilots. Because our customers no longer have to think about procuring hardware for years ahead. They don't have long purchasing cycles. And with AWS, they can really try out new things with little to zero risk. And it sounds super easy, but oftentimes you get customers telling you, "Hey, I have to get, I have to get a purchase order first, or I have to do a benchmark against who knows whom. We need pricing proposal. We need this and this and that, and this is our process, and this is why we can't do it." And so part of our conversation that we have in account management, and together with ProServe and the partner team and other functions at AWS, is really to help our customers to be innovative, to show bias for action within their existing processes and constraints in the short term, but also to guide them to change their processes and to be more agile in the long term.
What about you, Thomas? Have you ever experimented with using these kinds of innovation approaches with customers as well as in your own team?
Yeah, so what I noticed is that while we are a platform team, right? Effectively, we get pulled in through the service teams using us into discussions with customers. And in these discussions, usually when when the topic at hand is discussed, it usually switches into how do you actually do it? How do you deliver that many things? How do you coordinate that even? Right? And hey, you might not need to do that. So a lot of discussions we're actually having is then, Like when the topic fades out, it's like kind of how does that work? What is what is your secret? I was like, it's not a secret, it's out there. It's living this, is following that idea and be true to it. Because like I think, sorry, one sentence, the idea around the leadership principles is that if you have a shared understanding, you don't need processes. Right? We have pretty much no processes for something because we expect people to do the right thing because they have this idea.
Yeah, I'm not on the panel, but I'll just make a couple of observations about my own experience because what you just said then really resonated with me. I think one of the ways in that the leadership principles are incredibly valuable is in autonomous or distributed decision making. It's literally not necessary to go to the hierarchy, to the center, if you feel that your decision path, your course of action, can be justified by assessment against these leadership principles. So it provides a mechanism for enabling massive numbers of teams to move fast with a high degree of autonomy. Once you've got the green light to do something, you can set direction using your own assessment against these LPs, which is actually a very powerful tool when you've got distributed teams, as I do in my own role, or teams that are relatively small and you want to move very, very quickly and very autonomously, which I think is really valuable. And also my own example of using them in action is with user groups, which was the first panel of the day that I also chaired. When I started in the UK with AWS, there were only a couple, and I was thinking, is this something that I should invest my time in? But customers love them. They're very, very low cost to operate, so they're super frugal. And I figured you could probably have one in every country, every city in the UK with more than 200,000 inhabitants, which is like a good thing, big opportunity to have user groups, maybe 10 times as many as we had at the time, which is pretty much what we have now. So I used them myself from day one of starting here to make decisions. Okay, last set of questions. Is there anything about AWS that still surprises you? I'm going to ask you, Jonathan, first of all, and then come back down the panel.
I think what still surprises me is the pace of innovation, right? Like if I just look, for example, at Amazon Web Services, like at first it was about virtual servers, and that was like a big thing, and then we had configuration management, automation around it, and then when we thought, okay, we mastered that, Docker and containers entered the scene, right? And now we have serverless. So every time you think, oh no, this problem is now sufficiently solved, there is a new thing coming along, there's more innovation, we release more services that totally show you, oh, there's a totally different paradigm to solve this problem. It doesn't mean that the other ones are obsolete, right? But like nothing stands still, right? I would continue to innovate, and that amazes me, right? Like it's hard to keep up with all of that.
There's probably not much that still surprises me about AWS, honestly, or Amazon, but there's a lot that continues to amaze me. Particularly if you look at the rate that we've been growing since 2006, we've pretty much been growing at 40% and more year on year. We've added more and more people, we've added more and more services. And what you often see happen with a company that size and that hyper growth, you see companies turning a little bit arrogant, maybe falling into the not invented here trap, thinking they know everything better than anyone else. And I think what I really like about AWS or Amazon is that our culture in itself is humble, that we continue to listen to our customers for feedback, that we always push for more and better, and we never accept the status quo. And I think that is something that absolutely amazes me, that 12 years in the history of Amazon Web Services, we're still doing exactly that, and it's still, as it's also the motto, I think, for today, day one.
Cool.
Thomas?
For me, so I think it's the same domain. It's the idea that it still goes on, and it's ever accelerating. You kind of, it took me a while to get there. Like kind of, we joined as a small startup, and I was a little bit scared. The company had roughly 100,000 people, and like kind of, we had these discussions, right? And I go, oh my God, so many people. Okay, we are a lot bigger now, like way bigger. But it makes no difference. Like kind of, the interesting thing is that it just keeps accelerating, it just keeps moving, and the opportunities you can work on, it's creating new challenges because of the size. Like if you talk to recruiting folks, there's tech teams in recruiting just to manage this. And there's so many interesting things you see left and right that is happening. It's amazing.
What about you, Lars? Is there anything about Amazon that still surprises you?
I mean, there's things that still fascinate me, so I think it goes all along the same way. So that what the other says. So for me, also when I joined, it was a much smaller company, roughly 100K or so, and now we are more than 560, I believe, is the official number. And what I really like is that it doesn't feel much different, right? So that's a cool thing. So I also, before I joined AWS, I said, okay, this will be my last gig in a big company because I'm not so big fan of processes and stuff. And actually, since so I really enjoy that. It's different. So it keeps being different. That's the nice thing, I believe.
Yeah, I'm laughing because I used to work in telecoms, which is like almost the exact opposite of many attributes of AWS and Amazon, completely process driven, and this is a very, very different kind of org.
Yeah, maybe to add to that, I think Thomas said it earlier about we actually have surprisingly little processes, and that's something that keeps amazing me. We're being a large company, would expect there is a process for everything, and you need to file a form to get more staplers or something like that, right? And Amazon is actually the exact opposite. It feels at times that we're actually lacking processes, right? And the reason is, like Thomas was explaining, that we use the leadership principles as these guiding polar lights, right? Like to show us the direction, and then the default assumption is hands off, like people will do the right thing, and we might need to tweak the leadership principles as we did over the last years, right? Yeah. As we learn more, and what I also really like, it says these are our leadership principles unless you know better ones. Right, so it's not that we have our certain dogma and we only listen to that. Like we try to find out what is the best ways to help us do the right thing, and that usually means have less processes, have less standards, and rely more on tools, automation, and people doing the right thing.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, great. So I think we've exhausted my question bank. I just want to thank you all for participating in this panel. I hope it's been interesting for those of you in the room, and I hope you've at least enjoyed it on the stream. I will be back at the top of the hour on the stream with some more technical content, but thanks for joining us for this afternoon's panel. Thank you.